Hello everyone. So, I am on the Canvas app. I go to the Pages section. I look at day 2 in the area where it says preparing for day 3, and I click the lesson slides there, and it brings me to day 3 lesson slides. And so I'm going to go ahead and share those to Notability right there in my stats folder. Say OK. Open that up, and here I am in Notability. Okay, so let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about the language of experiments. So statistics gets used in a lot of different experiments in all sorts of industries. In business and marketing, psychology, biology, all sorts of different places. As an overview, we already had in day 2, we saw an introduction into a lot of statistics terminology, including sampling. And now what we'd like to do is talk about studies. This section will conclude chapter 1 for us, and then after it we will begin chapter 2. We will see 3 videos on chapter 2, and then we will have the first celebration of knowledge, which will conclude unit 1. So that's what we have before us. The goals of this particular lesson is to learn the meaning and usage of 14 terms about experimental research. And we also want to consider 9 common pitfalls of a statistical study and look at those critically. Okay, let's begin with some context involved. So here's 3 basic studies that I've seen. So one, does task significance increase job performance? So this is something you might find in organizational behavior. So this is an abstract from another study. 2 field experiments examine the effectiveness of signs requesting hotel guests' participation in environmental conservation program. Okay, so it appears that employing descriptive norms, for example, the majority of guests reuse their towels, proved superior to a traditional appeal widely used by hotels focused solely on environmental protection. Moreover, so something like reuse your towel so that we use less water, which is better for the environment, something like that. Moreover, normative appeals were most effective when describing group behavior that occurred in the setting that most closely matched the individual's immediate situational circumstances. For example, the majority of guests in this room reuse their towels, which we refer to, and they call this provincial norms. Okay, and then the last study, the aim was, we aimed to test the initial efficacy of and sustained effects of an 8-week mindfulness meditation mobile app, Calm, compared to a waitlist control on stress, mindfulness, and self-compassion in college students with elevated stress. So they test whether or not using this app, Calm, was more effective at combating stress, increasing mindfulness and self-compassion in college students. Okay, let's get into the terminology. So we have each of those experiments there have a response variable and an explanatory variable. The response variable is what we call the variable that we seek to understand or control. You could also think of this as the dependent variable. So in our example here, does task significance increase job performance? The response variable is the job performance. That's what we're interested in. For that last example, the response variable is their ability to control stress, mindfulness, and self-compassion. That's the response. Those are the response variables. The explanatory variable is the variable that may affect or control the response variable. We're not sure if it has an effect. We suspect it has an effect, but we're not sure, and that's what the point of the experiment is. So the explanatory variable for this middle one here would be the signage. And are they appealing to norms or not, or are they just saying, please reuse your towel? So that signage is going to affect the response variable, which in the case of this second study is the participation in this conservation initiative. Treatments. Treatments are just the different levels of the response variable. Okay, so that's the treatments. The experimental unit is just the single object or individual that the variables describe. So it's the object in the study. Okay, let's take an example here. So Denver Honeycutt wants to determine the optimal amount of nitrate to put in his potting soil to maximize the yield of his potato plants. He has 10 plants and plans to plant them in soil with varying nitrate amounts. Then he takes the total weight of tomatoes each plant produces. So the response variable here is tomato yield in weight. Weight is the way that we're going to be quantifying the tomato yield. Then the explanatory variable is going to be the nitrate amount in the soil. The treatment is going to be varying levels of nitrate in soil, and the experimental unit is going to be the tomato plant or the tomato plants. Okay, so that's that study. All right, there are something called lurking variables. These are variables that may also affect the response variable. So these are things that we want to try and control for and account for. For instance, if the response variable is the plant height, well, the amount of sunshine that they get may also affect that, or the difference in the soil even beyond the nitrate amount. All those may affect it, and they need to be controlled for. They need to be evened out between the control group and the treatment group, which is what we're talking about next. The control group is a group of experimental units given a baseline amount of the treatment, which is usually none. But soil will generally have a normal amount of nitrate in it. That's just sort of the baseline. The treatment group is a group of experimental units given some potentially effective amount of the treatment. This is what we're trying to study. Does a greater nitrate concentration in the soil have an effect on the production of the plant? Now, we talked a little bit about lurking variables. And the way to control for those lurking variables is to use random assignment. And so we'll discuss a bit more about what that looks like in the next example. But random assignment here is the practice of assigning experimental units to each group in a random way. So for instance, if plants from your so the plants from your greenhouse, if they came from different nurseries, right? Maybe you had 40 from nursery A and 10 from nursery B. You don't want to make the ones from nursery B your control group and the ones from nursery A your treatment group, because there may be a lurking variable between the two nurseries that's going to affect your the growth of your tomato plant. And so what you would want to do is randomly assign them. And you could do this in a stratified sort of a way, where the nurseries are the strata. So this is the control group, and here's the treatment group. And what you could do this in a stratified way, where you take 5 from the from nursery B, randomly selected, and then the remaining 5 from nursery A. From nursery B to the treatment group, and then you could randomly assign 20 from nursery A and 20 from nursery B, and randomly assign it that way. However, if you didn't do the stratified sampling to randomly distribute them. The idea is that if you randomly sampled them, the probability of getting a plant from nursery A in your treatment group is 4/5. The total is 50 plants. 4/5 of that are from nursery A. So if you did this randomly, the proportion of plants from nursery A in either group should be 4/5. And that's if you're just doing it random without stratifying. And so randomness is the best way, one of the best ways to try and evenly distribute the values of the lurking variable across your treatment group and your control group. And so that's why random assignment is so very important. That's why it gets its own bullet here. Okay, let's take a look at this example again. We've got Denver Honeycutt wants to determine the optimal. Okay, so it's the same thing as before. What's the control group? The control group is going to be the group of plants given the base amount of nitrate. The treatment group is going to be the group or groups of plants given elevated amounts of nitrate. So you could have more than one treatment group, depending on the different levels of nitrate that you're interested in testing. You could even have one where you try to remove nitrate from the soil, or you get soil that's nitrate depleted. Random assignment here. The random assignment here would be randomly assign plants to each group. Okay, possible lurking variables. So there's a bunch of different things here. Is the control group closer to the window than the treatment group? Is one getting more sunshine than the other? So there's one, so sunshine. Another possible lurking variable here might be ventilation. Are some plants placed under an air vent? Okay, here's a quiz that I would like you to do. Remember, you are going to be submitting these slides, and the expectation is that these are all filled in and completed. You will be given a grade based on the completion of these slides. Okay, a few more terms here. So placebo. A placebo is a treatment that does not influence the response variable. So we want to make sure that the treatment group, this is also the treatment that the control group gets, is this placebo. Okay, single blind. So this is when the subjects in the experiment do not know whether or not they are receiving the experimental treatment or the placebo or the control. And the reason for that is because of the power of suggestion. So there have been some very interesting studies about the power of suggestion, one of which by a researcher by the name of Stuart Wolf. He gave these pregnant women who were complaining about gastrointestinal discomfort, he gave them like 3 different treatments. One was a stomach relief treatment. Another one was something that was inert. And then another treatment he gave was Ipecac, which is something that induces vomiting. And you could imagine that that's not going to make your stomach feel any better. But as it turns out, giving them the treatment each time, saying, here's just sort of giving it to them conveyed to the patient, to the subject, that this was going to relieve their stomach pain. And so they believed that, and that belief was enough to make the Ipecac effective. Indeed, some of the participants in the study reported that their stomach ache was improved after taking Ipecac. Nobody vomited because of that. So that is very interesting, right? And so the placebo effect is real, and we've got to try to control for it. And so that's why we give pills that will allow them to think that they're also taking this wonder drug that we're testing. Okay, now double-blind is where not only does the subject not know whether they're getting the treatment or the placebo, but the observers and the ones giving the treatment, they don't know either. And that's good, because you could imagine that the researchers may betray somehow whether the subject has the actual treatment or the placebo. So that is a double-blind experiment. So somebody knows, but it's not the people observing, and it's not the people administering the treatment, and it's not the subjects. Okay, so there's some important terminology. Okay, 12, randomized controlled trial. So this is a very common type of trial, very common type of experiment. It's a study design that randomly assigns participants into an experimental group or a control group. As the study is conducted, the only expected difference between the control and experimental groups is a randomized controlled trial. In a randomized controlled trial is the outcome variable being studied, or what we call the explanatory variable. So randomizing is a really great tool, and it's used quite a lot. Okay, I would like to now pause for a second from our terminology to talk about critically evaluating studies. And what I want to present to you here is 9 different aspects of a study that are commonly misused. Now, I'm not saying that studies commonly have errors in them, but if there are errors, these are commonly what the errors are. So you've got problems with a sample. A sample must be representative of the population. If you have a biased sample, then your results may or may not be accurate. Self-selected samples. So these are responses only by people who choose to respond, such as call-in surveys, are often unreliable. And the reason that is because you're likely not getting a representative sample. You are sampling from a demographic that feels strongly enough to respond about whatever it is you're surveying. And so that may or may not be representative. Most people may not feel strongly about the particular thing you're interested in. Sample size issues. So samples that are too small may be unreliable. Larger samples are better if possible. In some situations, having a small sample is unavoidable and can still be used to make conclusions. Example, crash testing cars and medical testing for rare conditions. So those are things that we just have to do the best we can with a small sample. One of the problems with a small sample is, again, you may not get a very representative sample. Okay, undue influence. So this is collecting data or asking questions in a way that influences the respondent. So an example of this might be like you have a survey and the question is something like, how great is our hardworking customer service team? They feel sort of some sort of a social push to say that they're good, because people want to be agreeable, generally speaking. At least some do. And they might be unduly influenced by that question. Or for instance, how awesome is our product, right? That's not a very good question. Another pitfall. Non-response or refusal of the subject to participate. The collected responses may no longer be representative of the population when this occurs. Okay, so non-response or refusal of the subject to participate. So the collected responses may no longer be representative of the population. Often people with strong positive or negative opinions may answer surveys which can affect the results. So the difference between this one, you may notice that this is very similar to the self-selected samples. The difference here, they're very similar. The difference here is that in B, people have selected they have selected to participate, but in this other case here, this is where people opt out. They choose to opt out, and it's effectively pretty much the same. You're not getting a very representative sample. The sampling pool is disproportionately represented by people who feel strongly about the subject matter. Okay, another pitfall is causality. A relationship between two variables does not mean that one causes the other to occur. They may be related, correlated, because of their relationship through a different variable. An example of this might be ice cream sales and shark attacks. One could conceivably have a correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks. When ice cream sales are up, shark attacks are up. But the reasoning is not because the sharks like attacking people who eat ice cream. It would be what? It'd be the weather, right? When the weather is warm, more people go swimming. When more people go swimming, the likelihood of being attacked by a shark increases. When it's hot outside and people want to go swimming, they also want to cool down with some ice cream. And so they're related, but you can't say that one causes the other. Okay, self-funded or self-interested studies. A study performed by a person or organization to support their claim, the claim that they would like to be supported. When that happens, is the study impartial? So the idea here is, like a chocolate factory found that chocolate is good for you. Okay. Do we believe that? Well, it's not inherently false, right? But we should investigate. And so that's what it says here. Read the study carefully and evaluate the work. Do not automatically assume that the study is good, but do not automatically assume the study is bad either. Evaluate it on its merit and the work done. Okay, so if research funded by the group of vineyards found that red wine is beneficial to your health, it's a red flag. That's all it is. It's a red flag. It's not doesn't mean it's fallacious. It just means it warrants investigation. Okay, misleading use of data. We're going to see this a lot more in Chapter 2, but just be aware that some people may improperly display graphs, give you incomplete data, or have a lack of context for data. And so we'll see examples of that later. And then also there's confounding. The effects of multiple factors on a response cannot be separated. Confounding makes it difficult or impossible to draw valid conclusions about the effect of each factor. All right, and so ethics. I don't want to talk a whole lot about the ethics of a statistical study. That will be something for courses later on if you decide to pursue research. But I do want to just talk about a few terms here, which is the Institutional Review Board. The SVU has an Institutional Review Board. It is a committee tasked with the oversight of research programs that involve human subjects. When doing a test or a study that does involve human subjects, you need informed consent. Informed consent is that any human subject is any human subject in a research study must be cognizant of any risks or costs associated with the study. Whether they're given the placebo or not, they need to be aware of consequences either way. The subject has the right to know the nature of the treatments included in the study, their potential risks, and their potential benefits. Okay, and so consent must be given freely and by an informed, fit participant, and so that's informed consent. Okay, so apparently it's not easy in general to receive IRB approval. Since I did my PhD in applied math, I was mostly working with numbers that were computer generated, and so I didn't need any RIB approval, and so that was really nice. Okay, to recap, what did we talk about? Well, we talked about studies. We talked about different types of variables. We talked about the setup of a randomized controlled trial. We talked about how in an experiment you want there to be a control group and a treatment group, and these should be randomly assigned. These types of studies are often called randomized controlled trials. And then we talked about critically evaluating a study. And then lastly, we talked about a little tiny bit about ethics. Really just about the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, and informed consent. Okay, so two very common terms to know. Okay, everybody, have a great day. Don't forget to take the quiz and to submit these slides. And then we'll talk more about all of this material in class.